All right, so we're going to be talking about Chapter 4. So let me get this going. So Chapter 4 is going to be our fair housing and our discrimination, anti-discrimination laws. So we're going to talk about the federal, state, local anti-discrimination laws. We're going to talk about the illegal practices, what some exceptions are, and how they apply in real estate today. Okay. So you'll be able to identify the protections of the federal fair housing laws, also describe the protections of New Jersey law, and the implications of fair housing laws as regards to brokers and salespeople. Okay, so there are two federal laws as well as one state law, and then there are several illegal practices in the state of New Jersey. So let's start with our federal fair housing laws, okay? So the first one that I want to talk about is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And when I discuss the laws, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the things that you really need to know about it, the things you really want to remember, and there are some other things that you might find as minutia. I'm really going to go through the things that you really need to remember, okay? So the Civil Rights Act of 1866, this is one of our federal laws. This, in my opinion, is going to be the golden rule, the one that it offers no exceptions, okay? There are no exceptions to the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That does not allow for discrimination based on race, color, or creed. Now, what's interesting is I know a lot of people always point out to me, hey, Stu, creed, similar to religion. I get that. I totally understand. What we are going to do is we are going to use the words that they use because this is what you're going to see on your test. So when they refer to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it's going to be discrimination that is on the basis of race, color, or creed. This law offers no exceptions. There are no exceptions on this one. Second one, you're going to have the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. That covers race, color, religion, national origin. Okay. And again, this covers some of the other ones that the Civil Rights Act covers. And you'll see when we get into the New Jersey law against discrimination, that overlaps with some as well. There's reasons for that. But again, that's not something you really need to overly concern yourself. You really want to know what each one kind of covers, because here's what they're going to do. They're going to ask you questions that say based on the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, based on New Jersey law against discrimination, based on the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They'll basically ask you to show your knowledge of that fair housing law, okay? So Federal Fair Housing Act of 68, again, is race, color, religion, and national origin. Now, the Federal Fair Housing Act of 68 did have two amendments. And I always tell people that when we're talking about the amendments, what we want to do is we want to think about the times in which these amendments were added, because it has some social relevance, okay? 1974, okay? 1974, discrimination against gender or sex was added, okay? So sex was added in 1974. In 1988, people with disabilities and familial status. Now, I really want to talk about this one too, because it gives you the generalization of people with disabilities. I always like to say physical or mental handicaps, including AIDS victims. Why was that important to say in 1988? We're coming off the AIDS epidemic. So they explicitly added that in there. So AIDS victims, when they talk about people with physical or mental disabilities, and familial status, okay? There are some exemptions to the Federal Fair Housing Act of 68. I don't really want to go into. Again, what you really want to know is what each one covers. What each one covers, you want to know that the Federal Fair Housing Act of 68 has the two amendments. In 74, they added sex. 88, physical and mental handicaps and familial status, including AIDS victims. Now, the NJ-LAD. The NJ-LAD came into play in 1945, okay? Now, here's what I want you to know. You're going to say 1945. Well, it's like this was a really progressive law. No, it really wasn't, because what happens is in the Federal Fair Housing Act of '68, there was two amendments to that. Over time, the New Jersey law against discrimination has evolved to what we see it as today, where the protected classes for the New Jersey law against discrimination are that of age, ancestry, color, creed, disability. And you see how this one, they actually, in this portion of the presentation, they say, including AIDS victims and HIV infection, genetic information, marital status, domestic partnership, nationality, national origin, race, sex, sexual orientation. I am going to get into a slide where I'm going to talk more about the ethics and the legality of things, okay? Because we're talking about law. The more restrictive law when it comes to state and federal, the more restrictive one is the one that, trumps the other, okay? So the more restrictive of the law is the one that you would have to abide by, okay? So whereas on a federal level, there aren't, let's say, they don't see sexual orientation as a protected class. In the state of New Jersey, because we have the New Jersey law against discrimination, sexual orientation is a protected class. Okay, so you want to make sure that you know those. And again, this was in 1945. It has evolved to what it is right now. Okay, now we're going to talk about ethicality versus legality. Okay, legally speaking, there isn't much in regards to some protected classes, some things that you would say. One that I know off the top of my head, gender identity, transgender individuals. Okay, transgender individuals, as of right now, are not a protected class by law. Okay, not a protected class against discrimination by law. However, if you do decide to become a realtor, okay, and you ethically are bound to the code of ethics, okay, they have protected class for transgender and gender identity. So although it would be legal for you to discriminate against someone with a transgender or gender identity issue, you could not ethically do that, because you would be able to be brought up on ethics charges. So that's something that I want you to keep in mind. The other thing that we like to talk about is HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, and NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors. HUD and NAR have a fair housing partnership. It's one of the questions they love asking you is this a voluntary thing? Here's what it is. It is voluntary because you don't have to be a realtor. Be a realtor and a member of the National Association of Realtors, that's a trade organization, okay? That's a trade organization. So what happens is membership of the trade organization is not mandatory. So because of that, you don't need to be involved with HUD NAR Fair Housing Partnership. However, if you do decide to become a member of the National Association of Realtors, which most of you in New Jersey, due to our business practices, probably will be, that is mandatory, okay? Being a realtor is voluntary. Participating once you are a realtor in the Fair Housing Partnership is not, okay? Because you're bound by certain things when you join the trade organization, just like you're bound to a code of ethics that they put out there for you, okay? So that is important for you to note. And some of the things that you'll see as far as how, some of the illegal practices are handled, you're going to understand that in the coming slides, because now we are at our illegal practices, okay? So what I kind of want to do is I want to go through each one. I want to give you my thoughts on it. And the first one is blockbusting, panic peddling. This is a really relevant one too, because this has been in the news a little bit. So I want to kind of go into that as well. So inducing homeowners, okay, people who are going to potentially sell their homes, by making representations regarding the entry of prospective entry, okay, so the entry or prospective entry of minority persons into the neighborhood, okay? So you are inducing panic, okay, to sell by making representations regarding the entry or prospective entry of minority persons into a neighborhood. Now, I will say that it has come to my table saying, hey, the situation with some of the towns that we have, Northern Ocean, Southern Monmouth County, okay, with particular religious organizations moving into towns, is this blockbusting? Is this panic peddling? So what happens is, if you are not the one inducing the fear, if someone has, because we live in a very hypersensitive market, okay, we in a very hypersensitive, very information-driven society, because we have the internet, we have access to arguably more information quicker than any time in our history. The internet, social media, all these kinds of things have given us the power to have a great wealth of information. So in Southern Monmouth County, Northern Ocean, what people are fearing is that there is a certain impact that could be had by particular religious groups coming into certain areas. Now, in my opinion, if members of a religious organization happen to try to ask you to sell, there's nothing wrong with people being asked to sell a home. Are you in the market to sell? I know people who are, soliciting people in Southern Monmouth, Northern Ocean, that say, hey, would you, are you interested in selling your home? That is not panic peddling. That is not blockbusting. Okay. If you said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, I don't know if you thought about selling lately, but there is a particular religious organization that is moving into the area, and that might cause your home equity to drop drastically. So I think that now might be the time to sell. That's panic peddling. Saying, hey, you're interested in selling? If you are, I'm a great realtor. That's not panic peddling. Soliciting? Not panic peddling. Now, they might have no solicitation laws or no solicitation instructions in certain towns, the communities, things like that. That's different. But is that blockbusting? No, it's not. Even if you're a member of that particular religious organization and you go knock on someone's door and say, hey, I want to buy your home, that's not blockbusting. So we have to understand that blockbusting and panic peddling are different than possibly solicitation. So you want to kind of get a real feel for what panic peddling and blockbusting really is. If you are the one inducing the panic, you're probably panic peddling. If you're simply asking someone if they want to sell and if they want to sell with you, that's not panic peddling. Okay, that's solicitation. Okay, steering. Okay, steering. This is an interesting one. Steering is channeling home seekers either to or away from particular areas on the basis of race. Now, HUD sends out testers, okay, occasionally to see if you're using any kind of anti-discriminatory practices, if you are engaging in some things that might be. Now, I will talk about a story, and I will talk about it very vaguely. There was a home that a realtor was asked to show by a Black single mother and her child, who was, I think, 6 or 7. So they go to the home, and the mother asked a very simple question, okay, when she was in the home. Everything was going fine. The question that was asked of the realtor was this: there's 2 refrigerators in this home. Okay, there are 2 refrigerators in this home. There's one in the dining room, one in the kitchen. Why is that? The realtor said, well, that is because this family is an Orthodox family, and they are practicing kosher. We're in a very Orthodox community, so this is common for you to see in this area. So what they do is they keep their meats in one refrigerator, the dairy and everything in another. Okay? Now, that is a perfectly benign, innocent statement, right? I think that any one of us could actually sit there and say, that sounds like a perfectly logical thing. Not saying anything negative, not saying anything positive, just basically making a commentary. Okay? That mother and the child, they were testers. Okay? And this was an issue. This statement that the realtor made was an issue because this was viewed as steering. Why was it viewed as steering? Well, if she kept the comments to the particular family that the home was in, saying, well, this family is Orthodox and they keep kosher, so they will have a separate refrigerator for their meats and their dairy. That's fine. There can be an Orthodox family in any community. But as soon as the comments then shifted to the community being Orthodox and that there was a lot of Orthodox family there, so other homes that they might see would be similar to this. They might have, you'll have the kosher thing come up again. Now, she said it innocently and bypassing, and again, could be extremely accurate for where she was. However, this was considered steering because on the basis of the fact that she was not Orthodox, made it feel as though the agent was steering her away from an area, Okay, so that is another illegal practice. Next one is redlining. Refusing to make mortgage loans or issue insurance. It's in specific geographic areas in regard to qualifications of the applicant, okay, without regards and qualification of the applicant. Now, let me explain this a little bit more, okay? Redlining was an old practice that was legal point, okay, as was Jim Crow laws, things like that. We had parts of our country where, particular protected classes could not obtain loans, insurance in certain areas. And historically, depending on how you look at things and how you read how we have had our civil interactions historically as a country, a lot of people say that redlining, and the practice of redlining was what created what we would call modern day ghettos, okay? Because people wouldn't be able to get mortgages or insurance in specific areas because of their belonging to a particular protected class. So that's something that was a concern. It is not a legal practice anymore. This is in reference to mortgage loans and insurance, right? Insurance policies and mortgage loans. So let's talk about how licensees could be involved in or can't be involved in. We really cannot be involved in any discrimination whatsoever. If we are, you need to let the client know that you cannot work with them. That they need to be looking on their own. They need to be doing things outside of working with a licensed real estate agent. Okay, you need to document it. Bring it to your broker of record. These things are very, very important. Again, there is numerous things that you'll find as you're practicing real estate. Also, something that you want to be conscious of is if your advertising, your marketing, your MLS has some keywords in there, has the word church, close walking distance to a church, to temple. If actually one of the things is walking distance. Saying walking distance is sometimes viewed as steering people away who have disabilities, because saying it's a short walk to this bus stop, you're better off leaving things like that out. And sometimes the MLSs will actually catch that and tell you, hey, you need to change your wording here in regards to how you describe the property, because it could be viewed as a limitation based on some sort of discriminatory practice. Now, there are a few exceptions in New Jersey laws, and that's some things that you need to know about. So apartments or flats, members of one sex is allowed, okay? Religious-based organizations, to discriminate on the basis of religion. Okay, now here's the key there. Right? We want to talk about that for a second. If you discriminate on the basis of you being a member of a particular religion, the religion cannot discriminate against anybody else. It has to be, you basically have to be able to join if you are a member of any protected class, okay? And if the religion does not discriminate, then the basis of renting because you are a religious organization and they have to belong to the religion is allowed. That is allowed. The other is owner-occupant discriminate except for the race. There's no exception. Civil Rights Act of 1866, rental of a duplex or an up-down two-family dwelling. So basically, if it's an owner-occupied two-family, the owner can discriminate except based on race. Okay? Now, the New Jersey law against discrimination also applies to real estate transactions where there are loans, institutions, private individuals. Blockbusting is prohibited. Okay, so soliciting areas, again, there's a difference. We have to understand what blockbusting and soliciting is. Okay, because those two are very different. But what happens is those two dance a fine line, depending on how you present your solicitation. It could be misinterpreted as blockbusting. But if you present it a certain way, and there is no fear induced based on a protected class coming in, you're A-OK. Anti-discrimination posters should be posted in every office. And also, the Attorney General's memorandum against discrimination must be attached to every single listing agreement. Okay, so you have to give that out. I think that's right on the back of every single one. Mount Laurel. What do you need to know about Mount Laurel? What is a Mount Laurel? So Mount Laurel is lower income housing. Every municipality has to have an obligation to provide some sort of low income housing. Every single one. Mount Laurel is a town in southern New Jersey that had some cases come about that brought this to be. So they call it Mount Laurel Decision 1 and 2. You don't need to know the finer details about it. I'm not going to go into them. However, what you need to identify is that Mount Laurel 1 and 2 have to do with lower income being available to residents in every town, and every municipality has an obligation to offer some sort of Mount Laurel housing. Okay? Now, that is it for this chapter. Something that I do want you to do when you're going back and reviewing this chapter, I always tell my students, draw out a timeline. Timelines are absolutely great, fantastic, wonderful ways for you to really understand what year some of these laws came into play. Okay, so if you ever have any questions, always feel free to reach out. If not, best of luck, and I'll see you soon.